here we have some negative signs, and we had some negative signs in the last couple examples, but the place that makes a big difference is when you have the negative between the pairs of terms. So if it's the middle sign or the second sign, however you want to think of it, if that's negative, that makes a difference. Okay, so I'll show you how that's going to work here. So number 9. So I'm going to, first of all, I have polynomial with 4 terms, right? So grouping comes to mind, and I see that the first 2 terms have a common factor of x. So I'm going to factor out an x. Okay, and then the leftovers would be 2x minus 3, right? If I divide this by x, I just get 2x. If I divide this by x, I just get negative 3. Okay, so now here, don't write this down just yet, but if I were to factor out a 1, right, because there's the GCF, no GCF bigger than 1. If I just factor out a 1, then what would happen is I would end up with negative 2x plus 3. But I want to end up with 2x minus 3, right? So I have to factor out a negative 1. Okay, so because this is negative here, we want to factor out a negative. And what that'll do is when I divide negative 2x divided by negative 1, I'll get positive 2x. And when I divide 3 by negative 1, I'll get negative 3. All right, so now we see that, okay, this matches up with this. And so now we're in business, right? So we can take the 2x minus 3 out, and we can leave the x minus 1 on the inside. All right, so that's how it's done when you have a negative there in the middle. All right, so think about here what we could do, and here it looks like we have some things that we can kind of regroup, right? So it looks like we have a's here and here, 3's here and here. So I'm going to regroup. So I'm going to put ax minus ay. And since I put the x first here, I'm going to put the x first here. So I'm going to do minus 3x plus 3y. All right. So then I'm going to group these first 2 terms together. A is a common factor. So I take out an a. The x minus y is going to stay on the inside. With the second terms, 3 is a common factor. But since it's negative, we're going to factor out a negative. So it's going to be negative 3. And then negative 3x divided by negative 3 is positive x, right? So if I divide this by negative 3, I get positive x. Negative divided by negative is a positive. If I divide this by negative 3, I'll get negative 1y, or just negative y. Okay, now you can see that these match up. So that means we must be on the right track. So then we have x minus y here. And then our leftovers are a minus 3. So we'll put that inside the parentheses. So remember, you can always check your work by foiling this out, and you should end up back to what you started with.